Parsons. Who doesn't know Steve Parsons?
Forget about the intro.
You don't want the intro. Okay, I think we've introduced you enough, haven't we?
Just say I'm the ASSAP training officer.
ASSAP training officer, all-round legend, been on Uncanny. What he doesn't know about the fields isn't worth knowing. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Parsons.
Thank you. I know a lot about fields. Can you all see a shared screen with yeah, is it full screen for you, more or less? Cool. All right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, it's just a blatant advert for Paracoustics. Because I've entitled tonight Infrasound, It's Uncanny. And the reason for that is because I'm aware that Uncanny is returning. They're currently doing the American series of the podcast and then back to the television with a new multi-part series of Uncanny television episodes. And I was fortunate enough to be involved in that last year in one of the television productions. And it got me thinking that I'm sure you all are aware that Team Skeptic, led by my friend Dr. Kieran O'Keefe, is forever reaching out for the lifeboat of infrasound whenever they're cornered for an explanation. So I thought it would be relevant to let's talk a little bit about infrasound and where we, how we got to this and how it came about. Just to recap for those that aren't aware of my starring role, very brief starring role as the sound engineer on the program. I was contacted last year by the production team asking if I could put together an infrasound experiment to demonstrate the effects of infrasound upon a group of unsuspecting individuals. After some back and forth and heel digging on my part over the location, because you can't just you can just do infrasound anywhere. The trouble is, it's like letting a genie out of the bottle, and it can cause some untold problems. And the original location that was chosen was, for a number of reasons, I wasn't comfortable with. And so after a little bit of negotiation, I persuaded them. What I wanted was a very large, very substantial empty space. And I suggested that we use one of the hardened aircraft shelters at the former United States Air Force Base at Hayford in Oxfordshire. And on a very warm, scorching hot day last summer, we all duly assembled because that was a view inside with all of the equipment set up, which consisted of, I think, 2 chairs. And eventually, the star of the show turned up with his unsuspecting students, and they were subjected to infrasound. I'm not going to spoil the program by telling you what happened, except I knew exactly what was going to happen, and I predicted what was going to happen, and what I predicted would happen happened exactly as I predicted. But infrasound, I mean, the reason I was asked to go onto the show was because of Team Skeptic and their constant raising of the potential of infrasound, because it has become a bit of a universal explanation that's offered forward. It used to be EMF, but infrasound has become the kind of go-to when all else fails, blame infrasound explanation. and Team Skeptic were using it. So I thought it's a talk I haven't really visited for, it must have been almost 10 years now. So I thought it might be worth getting it out, dusting it down, giving it a breath of fresh air. It is quite a long talk. It is quite a technical talk. So I thought we would actually peel back some of the layers of the onion of infrasound. And we'll start with the mythology, the story, the legend that has become infrasound. And rather than me explain it to you, I thought we'd have a little bit of a video presentation, which sums it up. It's I can't remember how long it is. It's about 4 or 5 minutes ish, but I think it nicely sums up the current state of the paranormal field's interest in the subject.
How could a sound make you see a ghost? You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. Here are the facts. It's true that some vibrations or infrasound can have surprising effects on the human body. The world's militaries continue to research these devices in hopes of creating increasingly powerful weapons for non-lethal crowd control and other applications. But how extreme could the effects of sound actually be? Is it possible that a specific range of sound could make human beings lose self-control or even see into the afterlife? Here's where it gets crazy. Enter the alleged existence of the brown note. According to the story, this note was supposed to be a range of infrasound which could disrupt people's bowel control and cause incontinence. There are no documented cases of a sound that causes loss of bowel control. In fact, after Mythbusters tested this concept, the notion was widely considered debunked. Although they did find that infrasound could produce discomfort, they did not find a sound that could produce the effects of the alleged brown note. But while the brown note may just be a tall tale, sounds may be responsible for another unexpected experience: ghosts. After encountering a series of unexplained phenomena in a lab in Warwick, a lab long rumored to be haunted, Vic Tandy set about to explain the strange gray shapes and odd vibrations he'd encountered. He eventually discovered that a nearby fan was creating vibrations at a very low frequency, 18.98 hertz. Sounds at this level approach the resonant frequency of the human eyeball, which Tandy found was, according to NASA, about 18 hertz. This meant that a sound close to this frequency could cause the human eye to vibrate, creating a smearing of vision. In his paper, The Ghost in the Machine, Tandy and his co-author Tony Lawrence delve into these findings. Could this mean that other so-called hauntings are, instead, areas where low sound waves are creating anxiety, smearing vision, and convincing observers that they've encountered spirits? Tandy was fortunate on 2 counts. First, he was able to repair the mounting of the fan and exorcise the sound wave producing the ghost. Second, he was able to find the sound by using a fencing foil. Ordinarily, these sound waves can be difficult to detect without the proper equipment. This phenomenon may explain other ghost sightings, but investigators will have to research each location individually.
Well, there we go. I'm sorry about the robotic voice, generated by AI probably. Much of what the video said is broadly accurate. But we'll talk about it in a little more detail. I mean, should paranormal researchers even be interested in infrasound? But what is it? What actually is infrasound? It's typically defined as sound that has a frequency below that of normal human hearing, so considered to be below 20 hertz. Parapsychologist Dr. James Horan put it sort of more simplistically, that it is a hum that you can't hear. And not untypically for a psychologist, Horan is wrong. As it's actually perfectly possible to hear these very low frequency sounds. It depends upon the level of the acoustic energy. And what we can see is basically the louder it is, the more irrespective of frequency, we are able to hear it conventionally. But it has to be incredibly loud and increasingly loud as the frequency drops. So for the normal average human being, somewhere around about 20 to 50 hertz is where our hearing cuts off. It's age dependent. And we don't perceive these low frequencies terribly well. So they are effectively below the threshold of hearing. Early paranormal investigators were quite aware that vibrations, because sound is vibration of the air and of matter vibrating the air. But they were aware that vibrations may have some role in the production of reported paranormal experiences. For example, in the 19th century, in the late 1890s, the Bee House investigation, which involved several early members of the Society for Psychical Research, suggested that a seismometer might be usefully employed as part of the investigation process. And in fact, reading through the details from that particular case, there is actually a great deal to suggest that infrasound was a good candidate for some of the reported experiences. Back in the 1930s, our old friend, what talk without Harry Price, given by me without mention of Harry Price, but Harry Price made use of a bowl of mercury in his ghost hunting kit in order to detect the presence of low frequency sound vibrations. I don't think a bowl of mercury is quite as acceptable these days due to health and safety. And in 1961, Tony Cornell and Alan Gould carried out a series of experiments. They managed to find themselves a condemned house in Cambridge, and they used the device which they constructed, which sent powerful vibrations through the building. They were actually testing the idea that minor earth tremors and geophysical disturbances might be responsible for some of the physical effects, such as the movement of objects in poltergeist cases. Although they were not actually directly testing an infrasound hypothesis because none existed in 1961, infrasound did, just no hypothesis. It wasn't very well understood. The equipment would inevitably have been producing quite large quantities of very low frequency sound energy. Unfortunately, the records of the earth building shattering experiment makes no mention of psychological or physiological effects being experienced by the experimenters. The first person to directly link infrasound to anomalous experiences was the Canadian neurologist, Dr. Michael Persinger, who in 1974 did suggest that there may be a causal link between infrasound. He was specifically suggesting that the vague feelings of foreboding and apprehension that were reported by some individuals prior to earthquakes may be linked to infrasound. And he drew upon existing infrasound research that had been primarily conducted by the US military and NASA, which demonstrated that powerful levels of infrasound were capable of inducing a range of disturbing and unsettling experiences that had affected many of the test subjects, including feelings of fear, apprehension, depression, nausea, and dizziness. The military were looking to see if the astronauts aboard the Gemini and Saturn space missions could actually see the dials and operate the dials with the huge amounts of infrasound that were being generated by the rocket motors. Persinger suggested that weak infrasonic oscillations from ambient sources, specifically geophysical, may not be sufficient on their own to elicit full-blown symptoms, but could evoke responses of a less severe nature. The idea that infrasound may be responsible for creating experiences that some may interpret as being paranormal was revived in the late 1990s by, as the video said before, engineer Vic Tandy, following a series of experiences in a workshop at the university in Coventry that had gained a reputation for being haunted. Staff members, including Tandy, had had a series of anomalous experiences, including a strong sense of fear, a sense of depression, and the appearance of vague apparitions. Now, Tandy was actually a keen fencer, and one morning he had arrived early at the workshop in order to prepare his fencing blade for a forthcoming competition. When he placed the blade into the vise, he noticed that the free end of the metal blade was vibrating up and down. Recalling his recent experiences, he realized that if the blade was vibrating, it must be receiving energy in the form of vibratory acoustic energy. There was a lot of background noise, but Tandy realized that sounds can be infrasonic and therefore effectively inaudible. And so he set about trying to experiment by placing the blade on the floor, held in a movable vise, moving it around the workshop. He observed that the blade vibrated strongly in the center of the room and ceased vibrating at the ends of the room. And he realized from the experiments that he was sharing the workshop with a strong acoustic standing wave. In 1998, together with Dr. Tony Lawrence, he produced what has become and remains a landmark paper, The Ghost in the Machine. In this paper, the two authors documented some of the experiences of the staff and his discovery of the standing wave within the workshop. As an engineer, Tandy had realized that low-frequency vibration could cause the rapier blade to vibrate, and that any sounds produced by the low-frequency vibration would be inaudible. Using the known length of the workshop, he then calculated the frequency of the standing wave the standing wave as being close to 19 hertz, which was in fact infrasonic and therefore inaudible. The cause of the apparent infrasound Tandy traced to a newly installed extractor fan within the workshop. Tandy drew upon previous research in which test subjects exposed to high levels of infrasound. This was the NASA US military experiments, and in which reported effects seemed remarkably similar to his own experiences and to the experiences of his colleagues. And he was particularly drawn to a NASA report that indicated a frequency close to 19 hertz. It was which caused, or had been reported by the astronauts who the test subjects, to cause eyeball oscillations and vision smearing. As a result of these discoveries, Tandy and Lawrence made the suggestion in the paper that the inaudible infrasound at 19 hertz was causing the unwelcome sensations of anxiety and the sense of presence, and significantly that the effects of infrasound on the eye were responsible for the appearance of apparitions in the peripheral vision field, which the phenomena that he himself had experienced. The following year, he made field measurements of infrasound levels at a 14th century cellar in Coventry. The cellar was the site of numerous reports of paranormal experiences, and he was surprised to discover that the previously noted frequency of 19 hertz was present at higher than expected levels. This apparent confirmation of his earlier hypothesis led to a second paper being produced entitled Something in the Cellar, which was published in 2000. Incidentally, I was fortunate enough to visit the location prior to its ultimate closure, permanent closure in 2007, and made a series of infrasound measurements at exactly the same locations and positions within the cellar that Tandy had used. On that occasion, no infrasound peak of 19 hertz was found. And sadly for us all, Vic Tandy died suddenly and unexpectedly before he could conduct any further work on his infrasound hypothesis. Tandy's hypothesis truly lit a fuse that quickly exploded within paranormal research and within parapsychology. It was readily accepted as being the cause of many subjective paranormal experiences, ghostly sightings, and haunted locations. For instance, Google has more than 100,000 page links to Tandy's work. Much of it does just repeat the original idea that infrasound, and in particular infrasound with a frequency of close to 19 hertz, is responsible for many paranormal experiences. The hypothesis has been reported and repeated in several mainstream science journals, blogs, media, as well as countless thousands of internet sites dedicated to the paranormal. It has been described in books and reported in newspapers. Investigators and leading parapsychologists from the UK and the USA have been brought in to demonstrate and explain the paranormal effects of infrasound on various television shows. Most were content with merely measuring the infrasound levels, although at other times they did set up infrasound generating equipment in order to produce the legendary 19 hertz. And there's even been a movie dedicated to this idea, which was 19 hertz, the frequency of fear. So the idea that infrasound with a frequency of around 19 hertz had in quite a short time has become the de facto explanation for many types of paranormal experiences, as used by paranormal investigators, parapsychologists, and team skeptic alike. But should we simply accept this explanation? Can infrasound at a frequency of close to 19 hertz explain so many paranormal experiences? Let's re-examine Tandy and Lawrence's original paper. Based upon the length of the workshop, which we know was 30 feet, Tandy calculated the frequency of the standing wave. The formula, this was the formula that Tandy used. He published it in the paper, and it provided Tandy with the lowest fundamental resonant frequency of the workshop. In this case, it was 18.98 hertz. Tandy recognized and made clear that these calculations were subject to some degree of inaccuracy and suggested a margin of error of plus or minus 10%. When making his original calculations, he apparently took no account of either the height or the width of the workshop. Presumably, as he recognized or believed that the fundamental frequencies of those dimensions would be higher in frequency, therefore audible. However, in order to properly determine the acoustic properties of any space, and therefore accurately calculate the frequency of any acoustic standing waves within that space, calculations must be done that involve all three room dimensions. Broadly speaking, three types of standing wave will exist inside of any space. And I use a simple box to illustrate this. Although in Uncanny we did use we used the dome. The most powerful being the axial waves. The axial waves involve any two parallel surfaces, such as any two opposing walls or the floor and the ceiling. In the diagram, we can see a simple representation of the fundamental frequency axial wave formed by the walls making up the longest dimension of the room. So this is the 30-foot length room that Tandy used. Of course, in reality, axial waves will also exist between the opposing side walls and also between the floor of the ceiling. Within the base region, below around 250 hertz, which is considered to be low base frequencies, a total of 22 axial waves will therefore exist in such a space. Now we move on to the tangential waves, and these involve any two sets of parallel surfaces. In this case, the tangential waves are formed between all four walls or any two walls, the floor and the ceiling. In the diagram, we can see a representation of the fundamental frequency tangential wave formed by the four walls along the XY axis of the room. Tangential waves will also be formed between the walls, the floor, and the ceiling along the XZ and YZ axes also, making a total of 48 tangential waves existing below 250 Hertz. Now we have to also look at oblique standing waves, which are formed between all six surfaces. So these are the four walls, the ceiling, and the floor. And in this space, we have six oblique waves existing below 250 Hertz. Furthermore, the multiple standing waves that therefore existed inside Tandy's workshop would sometimes interact with one another and sometimes cancel one another out, resulting in a chaotic soundscape with numerous regions of high or low sound pressure being present throughout the workshop. If we could visualize these interacting sound waves, it would appear more like the surface of a stormy sea, with perhaps one or two more dominant wave systems imposed upon the general chaos. Fortunately, thank God for me, thank God, I thank God, modern computer programs exist that allow us to calculate these complicated interactions and the resulting frequencies of them. Whilst Tandy never provided the other workshop dimensions, in order to illustrate the numerous standing waves present, and I assume that the workshop to be of fairly average proportions. Using the provided length of 20 feet, I assumed a width of, the length of 30 feet. I assumed a width of 20 feet and assumed a height of 10 feet, which provided a reasonable basis to do these standing wave calculations. Using those figures, we obtain the following information. The table, which is on the screen, only considers those acoustic standing waves, their frequency and orientation at frequencies considered to be infrasonic or having extremely low frequency of less than 100 Hertz. Moreover, we discover the lowest frequency, the 18.98, that's noted by Tandy, actually only contributes 50% of the total acoustic power that is present within the workshop. The other 50% is being made up of the remaining frequencies. Tandy claimed to have traced the cause of the infrasound within the workshop to a recently installed 1 meter diameter extractor fan. He observed that turning off the fan caused the sword blade to stop vibrating, and the reports of the anomalous experiences also ceased. This certainly indicates that the fan was implicated in the production of the infrasound standing waves, but it does not necessarily indicate that the fan itself was the cause of the standing waves. Infrasound is present all around us. Every person listening to this presentation will be experiencing infrasound right now. Not from anything I'm doing, but just from the environment around you. The sources are man-made or natural, and it is capable of traveling extremely long distances, penetrating buildings and structures without any significant attenuation. So it is therefore likely and highly probable that the acoustic standing waves within the workshop were actually the result of a complex interactions between the extractor fan and some unknown external infrasound source. Tandy himself noted the considerable amount of background noise within the workshop, and from my own infrasound measurements at numerous sites throughout the UK, sometimes very high levels of ambient infrasound from other sources are the norm rather than the exception. Switching off the extractor fan would affect this interaction between the fan and the unknown external infrasonic source or sources, and this would reinforce Tandy's belief that the fan itself was to blame. In trying to assess Tandy's hypothesis, an additional difficulty is encountered. Although no information about the dimensions of the fencing sword blade is provided either, we can assume that as Tandy was a competition fencer, the blade would conform to the sport's regulations, having a length of between 80 and 90 centimeters. Therefore, the resonant frequency of the blade can easily be calculated using the same formula that Tandy himself used for his room calculations. And we find that the blade is resonant between 190 and 214 hertz. Using the room mode calculation program, we find that there are actually 3 standing waves that exist in the workshop within this frequency range, and 16 further standing waves within the plus or minus 10% margin of error that Tandy suggested for his own original calculations. So that adds another 16 standing waves. A final problem in assessing Tandy's claim is that only a proportion of the total available acoustic energy will actually be transmitted to the blade. In order to accurately carry out the computations required to calculate the actual amount of energy transmitted into the blade, requires detailed information about the sword blade and the workshop, their dimensions, the structures, and the materials. So it isn't actually possible. The graph shown is based upon the previously assumed dimensions of the workshop and shows a representation of the amount of acoustic energy, which is shown in red, that is transmitted to a 90 centimeter blade, which is shown in blue, at the different frequency bands from 0 all the way up into the audible range. The maximum amount of acoustic energy transfer actually takes place close to the blade's resonant frequency, which is to be expected. So in the region of 190 to 215 hertz. The efficiency of the energy transfer between the sound source and the blade falls dramatically as we move away from the blade's resonant frequency range. So if we take all of what I've just said into consideration, there is actually little left to suggest that Tandy and Lawrence's suggestion or hypothesis that the extractor fan was directly producing infrasound, causing the fencing blade to oscillate, is correct. There is little to support his hypothesis that infrasound close to 19 hertz is involved in the production of subjective anomalous experiences, or that continued infrasound studies based around the frequency of 19 hertz can have any particular value to psychical research. So does that mean that the infrasound studies are just a dead duck? Well, on the contrary, the duck, it seems, is, and I'm sure you'll all be pleased to hear, is very much alive and well. In a number of experiments that I have conducted and experiments carried out by other researchers in the field, infrasound has been shown to be a significant factor in the production of subjective anomalous experiences. For example, during an investigation of the Camel shipyard on Merseyside, it was discovered that large levels of infrasound were present throughout the location, and in particular an office block which had gained a strong reputation for being haunted. The chief source of the infrasound was discovered to be from ships running their generators and engines in the adjacent ship repair basin. Staff working in the office block had reported numerous instances of anomalous experiences, which included sensed presence, feelings of being watched, sense of anxiety, and visual phenomena, including apparitions. Here we can see a measurement, and you can quite clearly see the red lines that run down the waterfall display are the infrasound being produced at just about 5 hertz, 10 hertz, 15 hertz. Each one of them is actually a multiplier of the previous. So you can see there is the ship in the repair basin with these generators running, and a few hours later he turned them off. So when there was no ship in the repair basins, or when the ship had had its generator or engine turned off, whilst the general infrasound remained about the same level, there was no specific frequency banding, which you can see there. So ship running engines, ship turn engines off, running, off. The infrasound within the main part of the building, which was a large empty office block, was measured at 2-meter intervals, and completely unaware of the infrasound measurements, members of the paranormal investigation team from Parascience were conducting a routine paranormal investigation. And that consisted of them sitting in pairs and documenting their experiences, their thoughts, and their feelings. As part of the infrasound exposure pilot study, the investigators had been positioned deliberately in areas of lower infrasound, whilst others had been placed into regions of medium and high infrasound. And these were from the low to medium. We had notes from the investigators that said, I can hear team members talking quietly, everything is quiet, feeling a bit tired, slight headache, had it most of the night, not much in the way of anything happening, heard what sounded like footsteps. And one interesting one, don't usually feel as uneasy as this. From those in the medium to high infrasound areas, they will report, I have a headache and a pain in my ear. I just don't feel at ease tonight. I don't know why. I'm just waiting for something to happen. I feel anxious and my heart rate does seem to be elevated. Not much to report, but feeling cold though. Thought I saw someone standing next to me, and I don't know why, but I just don't like it in here. Now, these were people who had been up to the location more than a dozen times previously. From those in the higher infrasound areas, we saw a marked increase in the reports of unusual experiences and sensations. During the same period, a psychic medium was invited to walk around the locations completely independently and mark down on a plan anything that he considered to be noteworthy. Although this was only a pilot study, excuse me, conducted during the early field trials of some newly developed infrasound measuring equipment, the anecdotal reports from the investigation team did indicate that there was a clear difference between the experiences of those who were exposed to higher levels of infrasound compared with those exposed to lower levels of infrasound. Using the information from the shipyard staff, it also seemed to be the case that staff working in the building were also more likely to report paranormal encounters at times that generally coincided with ships being present in the repair basin with their generators running, and thus producing greater levels of infrasound. In 2007, the Mary King's Ghost Fest, or during the Mary King's Ghost Fest, we were able to conduct a large-scale infrasound exposure experiment using a specially constructed infrasound generator, which was and remains the largest ever field study of infrasound exposure to date. The experiment was designed to test the idea that infrasound might be responsible for producing paranormal experiences or enhancing paranormal experiences for visitors to Mary King's Close. The powerful infrasound generator, which I'd previously had to design and build, was located out of sight of the visitors inside the notoriously haunted Chesney's house, which meant that the poor staff operating it, me, had to spend hours alone in that part of Mary King's Close. The experiment exposed visitors to either the ambient infrasound found within the close or to the ambient infrasound plus the additional high levels of infrasound that the system was generating at 18.9 hertz, which was selected to test Tandy's hypothesis that this frequency may be key in producing increased reports of anomalous experiences. Particularly, we were looking for the visual effects and the resultant apparitions. The addition of infrasound was whether to add infrasound was decided by a random series of dice throws, and the visitors were not informed that they were being exposed to additional levels of infrasound. In total, more than 400 visitors were surveyed over a week-long series of experiments. The ambient infrasound in Mary King's Close was measured throughout and found to be significant across a broad range of frequencies, with a peak at around 15 hertz. This was traced and found to be caused by the heating and air conditioning equipment of Edinburgh City Chambers, which is located directly above Mary King's Close, with the actual machinery of the air conditioning and heating being situated within the lower part of Mary King's Close itself. At the end of the week-long experiment, there was a significant difference between the two exposure groups. In Group A, 249 people experienced both the ambient infrasound and the experimentally produced infrasound. In Group B, 190 people experienced only the ambient infrasound. 1/3 of those in Group A and just over 1/3 of those in Group B reported any anomalous experience at all, which they attributed to being paranormal. And this showed little difference between the two exposure groups. However, when the number of people reporting multiple experiences was looked at, there was a clear, distinct difference between the two exposure groups. And this was statistically considered to be a very significant difference. The experiment completely failed to demonstrate any of the visual effects predicted by Tandy's hypothesis, with just one person reporting any visual anomaly and no reports of apparitional experiences being received at any time during the experiment. The experiment strongly suggested that infrasound was responsible for producing or enhancing some of the experiences that people may associate with being paranormal. The experiment also indicated that infrasound does not affect everyone, with only around 1/3 of the sample being affected, regardless of the level or nature of their infrasound exposure. The infrasound experiment also produced some intriguing and unexpected results too. On the final night, after the visitors left, it was decided to run the equipment at its full output power, which had never been done before. We went to volume 11 from the usual running at about volume 4 because we wanted to see what would happen. And during this period, a number of the team, the Parascience team that were helping, and staff from the museum reported some very strange and very unexpected sensations. The peculiar nature of the sensations led to the infrasound generator gaining the nickname of the orgasmatron. This peculiar effect and the resulting nickname was perhaps shouldn't be so strange as it first may appear. In the 1980s, a US naval surgeon observed that many of the young ratings aboard US aircraft carriers would often assemble on deck, ostensibly to witness the launchings of the jet aircraft. Thinking it strange that so many junior ratings of both sexes were apparently so keen on watching the jets being launched, he decided to ask the ratings about their interest, and to his surprise, he discovered that they found the deep bass roar of the jets at full power sexually arousing. We completed our full power infrasound experiment toward taking place, and any reports that within the BBC that the following day, when the adjacent post office building collapsed, categorically had absolutely nothing at all to do with our experiment, and I reiterate it was merely a coincidence. The results from the Ghost Fest experiment had also confirmed an earlier mass exposure, infrasound exposure experiment. During a series of soundless music concerts, 750 concert goers were played live music. Some of it had been laced with infrasound. When added to the music, the infrasound caused a range of weird effects, even amongst those who were completely unaware of its presence. Strange reactions included an extreme sense of sorrow, coldness, anxiety, and reports of shivers down the spine. A sound plot taken during soundless music shows that in addition to the infrasound generated by the experimenters, there was also a substantial amount of infrasound present across a broad frequency range. This plot, which is on screen at the moment, shows the sound frequencies measured while the infrasound generator was being used, and at the time producing infrasound at around 17 hertz. We looked at the second plot, which was taken when the infrasound generator was not in use. It still shows substantial levels of infrasound present within the concert chamber, levels of up to 50 dBs at frequencies below 20 hertz. So generator on and the generator off. And what we can see is quite clearly the generator adds infrasound, but if you look at the frequency band below 31 hertz, you can still see there is a lot of infrasound still there. Tandy's hypothesis that infrasound may be responsible for inducing anomalous sensations was tested again in 2009 by the Haunt project led by Professor Chris French and a team from Goldsmiths. They used generated infrasound to investigate the possibility of creating artificial haunted room, specifically to investigate whether exposure to infrasound and complex electromagnetic fields, or both in combination, would lead to an increased reporting of anomalous sensations in the participants when compared to the baseline condition. The room they used was a circular chamber of wood, fabric, and canvas built inside an empty room, approximately 4 meters by 4 meters. A pair of electromagnetic coils were hidden outside of the chamber, together with a single infrasound speaker, also positioned outside of the chamber in the corner of the main room. The infrasound was generated by combining two sine waves, one at 18.9 hertz and another at 22.3 hertz, generated via the single speaker. These frequencies were chosen to be representative of the infrasound measured by Tandy in the Coventry cellar. Participants each spent 50 minutes in the chamber, recording on a floor plan a brief description of any anomalous sensations they experienced, also noting their positions within the chamber and the time the sensation was experienced. The participants were randomly allocated either an infrasound absent or an infrasound present state in combination with an electromagnetic field absent or electromagnetic field present state. Many of the participants reported having anomalous sensations. The researchers reported failing to find any support for a link between the presence of infrasound and the experiencing of anomalous sensations, and suggested that the case for infrasound inducing haunt-type experiences now appears to be extremely weak. However, many of the reported anomalous sensations that were reported by the participants have previously been strongly linked by researchers studying the effects of infrasound exposure. 79.9% of the participants in the Haunt project reported feeling dizzy or odd. 49.4 reported they felt as if they were spinning around. Tingling sensations were reported by 32.9, and 31.6 described pleasant vibrations through their bodies. Other sensations linked to infrasound were also reported, including the sense of presence, reported by 22.8, sadness 11.4%, terror 8%, and sexual arousal 5.1%. Sensations that may be associated with infrasound were additionally reported, such as hearing a ticking sound, reported by 25%, which may be due to changes within the air pressure caused by the infrasound acting on the eardrums, or some structural component within the room or chamber resonating due to the infrasound acting upon it. Some sensations were reported that have no known current association with infrasound, such as feeling they were somewhere else. Then that was wishing they were somewhere else, which was 33%, feeling detached from their bodies, 22.8%, and odd smells, 10.1%. Unfortunately, the experimenters failed to properly address a number of issues relating to the measurement and the physics of low-frequency sound. A serious error was the incorrect assumption that there was no infrasound present when the experimenters turned their infrasound generator off. Measurements of sound levels were undertaken and stated to be 75 dB when the equipment was on, and 65 dB when the air conditioning was running, 50 dB with all of the equipment turned off. So clearly there was 50 dB of sound energy present, and some of that would undoubtedly have been infrasound. Unfortunately, no information about the range of ambient frequencies that was present within the chamber was provided or gathered, and crucially, no information was provided about the sound measuring equipment that was used, and what, if any, weighting was applied to the measurements. In fact, the experimenters inadvertently would have produced significantly more infrasound than they realized by using two frequencies. Because whenever two frequencies are mixed together, they produce a secondary frequencies, well known to audiophiles as beat frequencies. One is formed by the addition or the adding together of two frequencies. So that would have been at a barely audible frequency of 41.2 hertz. The other is formed by subtracting the two frequencies and would have produced a deeply infrasonic 3.4 hertz. So it's therefore perfectly possible, and indeed highly likely, that significantly higher amplitudes of low frequency ambient sound and experimentally generated infrasound would have been present throughout the entire experiment without ever being measured or realized by the experimenters. The experimenters also did not consider interactions of infrasound from ambient sources, and the source of their own generator within the room, caused by reflected and refracted sound waves bouncing off the wall. Remember, these oblique and tangential and axial waves, and the possible effects of upon the participants as they walk through what might have actually been very large variations in these sound frequencies. Although interestingly, the experimenters did note in relation to the electromagnetic field that the nature of the field itself can vary infinitely, and the participants' movements through the field will add an extra level of complexity to the field as experienced. But they didn't make the same reasoning referring to sound waves. Without all these crucial bits of information, especially the levels of ambient infrasound, any argument offered by the experimenters against the role of infrasound being a causal factor in the production of anomalous sensations must be seriously questioned. In fact, when considering the reported anomalous sensations, it would appear there is actually quite substantial evidence within the data they collected for infrasound playing a highly significant role in the production of many of the experiences. Given the current state of our knowledge of infrasound and its links with subjective paranormal experiences, some possibilities we can suggest some possibilities. For example, 1/3 of the general population appear to be susceptible to the effects of ambient infrasound, and this bit seems more pronounced in cases of exposure to man-made infrasound, because its frequency range tends to be higher. Infrasound exposure manifests as a range of physical, physiological, and psychological sensations without any obvious cause being apparent to the percipient. Many reported sensations resulting from ambient infrasound are highly similar to subjective paranormal experiences, including the sense of presence, feelings of anxiety, fear, being uneasy, and awe, and unexpected physical sensations. Therefore, with respect to the location, personal belief, expectation, and prior knowledge, the role of infrasound at a broad range of frequencies is likely to result in an increase of those interpreting these unexpected sensations as having a paranormal origin. But there is yet more to infrasound and other low frequency sounds than mere ghosts. Let's talk a little bit about the hum. The essential element that defines the hum or the humidras is what is perceived as a persistent low frequency sound, often described as being comparable to that of a distant diesel engine idling or some other similar low-pitched sound for which obvious sources, for example, household appliances, traffic noise, etc., have been ruled out. There are a number of audio reproductions of the hum that are available on the web. Other elements seem to be significantly associated with the hum, being reported by an important proportion of hearers, but not by all of them. Some people hear the hum only or much more inside, hear the hum only inside or much more inside of buildings as opposed to being outside. Some perceive vibrations that can be felt through the body. Earplugs are reported to be not effective at decreasing the hum. The hum does appear to be geographically focused, and it does appear to be possible for hearers to move away from it. For example, the range of the Taos hum was reported to be between 48 and 72 kilometers. Women are more likely to be affected by men. Age also does appear to be a factor, with older people more likely to report adverse effects or hearing the hum. In addition to the hum, many locations around the world are associated with apparent sounds of ghostly cannon being fired. These include a number of battlefields and castles, and such sounds are not strictly infrasonic, but their low frequency nature suggests that they may be related in some way. But is it even just infrasound that we should be interested in? Ultrasound, for example, the domain of the dog whistles and bats, is well known for its abilities to disrupt human physiology. Ultrasound is defined as those frequencies which lie above the range of normal human hearing, so typically 20,000 hertz. And again, we can see from this threshold of human hearing, as the frequency goes up, our perception of it will decrease. And this is very age related. And as we age, our ability to hear very high frequency sounds becomes significantly degraded. The mosquito, that device on the wall that you can see in the picture, exploits this age related deterioration in our hearing and uses ultrasonic frequencies in order to deter loitering teenagers from outside of shopping precincts and supermarkets. I'm going to play a warning first. So turn down your volume because this could be loud and somewhat disturbing. It lasts 1 minute. This is a device called LRAD, which is long range acoustic device. Having been on the having been fortunate position to have had the opportunity to play with an LRAD 4 or 5 years ago, they are the video doesn't go anywhere near the true volume of it and the narrowness of the sound beam that's projected. You can be just a few feet away from that big square emitter. And as you can see, the lines of police walking alongside the vehicle, completely unaffected, not wearing any hearing protection. The crowd to either side of the LRAD beam, because it is a very narrow acoustic beam, again, largely unaffected. And as the beam is swung from side to side by the operator, the effects are really quite instantaneous and very, very uncomfortable. And you don't get quite as wet as if they use a water cannon. So it's a sound cannon in effect. Now, if we're considering the paranormal and ultrasound, we do need to find a source for the ultrasound. Where are we going to find such a source? Well, maybe bats. Because bats produced ultrasound is highly directional, as it is with the LRAD. And so any effects would be extremely variable. And so linking the potential to ultrasound within a location would be quite difficult to demonstrate. Moreover, the mere presence of bats may have a powerful effect on some individuals simply due to the perceived and inherent fear factor of the bats getting tangled up in your hair and clothing and flying around. And I'm sure anyone that's been at Woodchester will have seen the effects of the bats fluttering around on some of the investigators. And so that alone would heighten any experiences or perceived interactions, especially if that was then enhanced with some ultrasound. As we draw the talk to a conclusion, I think we can go yet further. And this is new research that's still ongoing and is still starting to produce some very interesting results. It may actually be that all sound, infrasound, ultrasound, and sound that we normally consider to be well within the range of human hearing, but instead of frequency being low, this is sound where the amplitude is low. So instead of the frequency being outside of the range of human hearing, it is the amplitude that is below the threshold of human hearing, i.e. it's too quiet. Yet it still can be shown to be affecting people. People are consciously not unaware of the sound. They can't actually properly hear it. But when you measure the effects upon them, they are responding to the sound. And in fact, this effect of inaudible sound is used, has been known about for several hundred years. It was used in a lot of religious music, sacred music. The use of particular notes, particularly the bass notes produced by the organ, would inspire a sense of awe into the assembled masses at the church. And it's also used by video game designers. What they would do is they will play a beat track, which is inaudible, and the beat track is synchronized to the heart rate, the resting heart rate. And as the game levels increase, so this beat track, this heartbeat track, gradually also increases its rate. And the speeding up, the heart goes with it. And so people generally find themselves to be more excited, drawn in by the game. And I'm hoping if I press that, it comes up with yet another pointless advert for Paracoustics, which explains all of this in a much more readable format. I'll stop sharing my screen, put my camera back on, and we can hopefully take some questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Steve. I'm going to hand over to our other wonderful exec, Stu Neville, who is probably much more au fait with these sort of things. It was an excellent talk. And thank you all for waiting around with the initial confusion we had, guys.
And dealing
so I'll hand over. Go on.
Dealing with cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to hand over to Stu now, and he'll put the questions. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much indeed, Steve. Absolutely wonderful. Very much enjoyed that. It's good to see scientific rigor being applied sometimes. It really is. It's good stuff. Right then. So I'm just going to go through the questions. There's the usual parade of good evenings. Good evenings. Isn't it lovely here? Always nice. It's nice and strangely sunny here. Good. La, 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 la. Yeah, good. Excellent. Exciting. Brilliant. It's all right. We'll get to it in a minute. There's a lot of discussion of what's going on. Hang on.
Cloudy here.
Here we go. Right then. Okay then. First thing. Oh, this is a good point. From Jackie Tonks. Infrasound could not explain the same detailed phenomena frequently being, say, in the same location, though. Does that not depend on what the source of the infrasound is and where it is?
No, infrasound is not implicated in, and this is the mistake that's being made by a lot of investigators, a lot of parapsychologists, in that they just attribute everything to infrasound. And in fact, infrasound can't do, it is an enhancer. It is not a creator. It doesn't cause paranormal experiences. But if there are other, if expectation is high, if you are there on a ghost hunt, if the place looks horrible and haunted, and infrasound is present, you will find that it increases the number of people who report experiences, or the intensity of the experiences that are used. On its own, of course, as I said earlier in the talk, wherever you are listening to this presentation in the world, you will be subjected to infrasound at sometimes quite high levels, and yet you're not all going, oh, there's a ghost and I'm having a paranormal moment. It needs to be, it's the cherry on the cake.
Yeah.
And the cake is expectation, belief, the environment, the location, etc., etc. So it's not the universal explainer, and it doesn't explain things like repeated ghosts. It doesn't explain smells. It doesn't explain the sensation of being touched. It doesn't explain a whole raft of paranormal sensations. It does explain some, and only in some people.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, what like we've said any number of times in this, a lot of investigation is very context based. You need to establish the baselines of what you're already going to hear, what you're going to see. You can't just rock up for a night and go, oh. You need to know what it normally sounds like, what it normally does over the space of a week or stuff. Yeah.
And also, it also offers a reason as to why some people are reporting paranormal experiences alongside people who aren't, because infrasound is the enhancer, but only for about a third of the population.
Okay.
So the other 2/3 are going, what's up with you?
Yeah. Right. So, Kieran, the sound might be more related to air currents generated by the rhythmic motion of the fan blades. So, coming back to the fan, and therefore to pressure fluctuations as a result of this. I helped a friend get rid of a nasty, creepy air vibration near to her bed, which was down to a ventilation grill which had a badly operating fan at the end of a duct. Clean behind the duct and replace the filter, which should have been there, was not, solve the problem, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it may not, as Tandy said, to attribute it to a single source. In the case of a fan, for example, as in Tandy, it may have been the removal or the repair of the fan, or it may be that by changing the resonant frequency of the beats of the blades of the fan or the airflow through it by cleaning the duct, you're also changing the interaction between the sound waves generated by the fan and the existing ambient sound waves that are there already. And I think we demonstrated that during the talk. So you would have to work a little harder to actually go as far as to say and attribute a cause. But certainly by removing, it's rather like, as audiophiles know, if you've got a rattle or a bass speaker, that you can sometimes fix it just by adding a very small weight to some part of the system, which changes the resonant frequency by a couple of hertz, but then throws all of the resonance away from it, so you don't get the vibration anymore.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, my son's a musician. He had his bass guitar. He used to put a brick on top of his amp, and that did it.
Yeah,
that would stop the rattle, just completely stop the rattle. Yeah, just a brick.
So what Kieran says is perfectly, and in fact, it's something I've used on a number of occasions, where you do something to change one of the conditions, and therefore you change all of the frequencies in that of those oblique, tangential, and axial waves.
Yeah, okay, got you. There's quite a lot of questions, so I'm going to wrap because I'm aware of the time. Emma, I played with the ghost frequency one day and to see if I would hallucinate. I didn't, but I'd have a migraine for days afterwards. Do you think that's a coincidence or a direct result of me being a Muppet? Wow. This is interesting because I read Persinger himself, wasn't he? You mentioned Persinger earlier on when he was doing his magnetic thing. And Persinger got away with bloody murder, didn't he? Considering it was the 70s, strapping electromagnets to people's heads and like drilling into them, God knows what else.
Actually, I built a God helmet for Dr. Winsper, because Persinger was very cagey about what he actually did.
I'm not surprised.
Well, all of the pictures you see of this, it's actually a what do you call it? Those ice ski things, a ski-doo. A ski-doo, not a motorcycle helmet. And he talks about random electromagnetic fields being applied to the temporal lobes, which are the bits behind your ears. What he actually used was the coils out of a pair of headphones. Right. And the electromagnetic field, he ripped the cone out the speaker, so you just have the coils. And what he actually used was basically music tracks.
Okay.
Now, I remember, and there is an interesting experiment. If you want to, it's got nothing to do with infrasound, but if you want to reproduce the God helmet, in fact, I'll wager that almost every adult listening to this presentation has possibly experienced a God helmet moment when we were all youngsters and we used to sit. We used to lie in our bedrooms listening to music with headphones on. Now, the headphones are, over your ears, very close to the temporal lobes of the brain. And you're playing music. So you've got two electromagnetic coils above the temporal lobes. How many people, and I've asked a lot of people, did you ever feel like somebody just walked into the room behind you? Turn around and go, oh, I thought somebody was coming into the room. That is the God helmet effect, because you're applying a random fluctuating electromagnetic field to the temporal lobes, and on a low scale, you're experiencing a good God helmet effect.
Well, the reason I asked you, so we better bring back Persinger, because wasn't he the one who postulated that there was a connection between certain frequencies and certain magnetic things, but also migraines, epilepsy, etc., etc. They're all on the same spectrum, aren't they? And basically, he said certain things could trigger it, not just the visual, but that kind of thing.
Persinger, I think, he was legendary for producing papers. I think, one of the papers was What I Had for Breakfast. He was that prolific. We can attribute many, but particularly infrasound, which, had nothing at all. Persinger was not doing anything related to infrasound and ghosts. Most of his
Hmm.
most notable work relates to electromagnetism.
Yeah.
But he did in the 70s suggest that the seismic infrasound waves were related, were linked to the sensations of foreboding prior to an earthquake.
I'm going to come to that actually in a bit, because there's something I want to ask you about. But getting through, and there's a lot of these. Kieran again, the power curve for the production of very low frequencies for loudspeakers becomes prohibitive as far as human hearing is concerned. So very large speakers are required and powerful amplifiers drive them. Yeah, I think you said that, didn't you? Rob Gandy, I read in a book many years ago in the 19th century, somebody invented a machine that could vibrate at the resonant frequency of bones. It was supposed to be used as a weapon, but I'm not aware of it ever being used. Wasn't Tesla supposed to have come up with something similar?
There was
Wasn't there?
There was the famous French designer, I can't remember his name now, who came up. There was the military, as it alluded in the video before. The military have been somewhat obsessed by acoustic weapons for a long time, and really the only one that they've ever managed to produce successfully is LRAD, because infrasound, Gavro, and he came up with the giant infrasound whistle. But infrasound, you can't. It's so powerful and so omnidirectional that you can't turn it into a weapon, because you would, if it was an effective weapon at volumes of around about 200 decibels, it does cause some physical damage. But you would eliminate your own side equally as with the opposition, and that's you can demonstrate this sort of non-directional effect of low frequency sound and versus high frequency. LRAD and your tweeter speakers,
as a subwoofer.
You have to, but your subwoofer you can stick it anywhere.
Behind the sofa. Got you. Got you. Okay, go cracking on through. So there's a fair few. With regards to famous brown note, numerous metal bands have tried that success. Yeah. John Cale tried it, didn't he? And it didn't work. Or he just killed a pigeon or something, didn't he? That landed in front of it. It was like,
you can cause physical disruption to the human body, but you need amplitudes of in excess of about 200 decibels, which your eardrums would have long gone before your body gets damaged. But you can do it, but you need so much power that it's unfeasible.
Yeah, that's twice jet engine noise, isn't it? Pretty much. Claire, you can see more of Vic Tandy's work on his YouTube program about Ghost of the London Underground, and she supplied a link to that. Kieran again, the vibrating blade in the vice shows a common issue in vibration acoustic isolation. This is vibration moving through a structure, which is then able to emerge into small light and flexible items secured into a large solid structure. I think you said that as well, didn't you? I'm going to skip a few now because there's quite a lot goes into Tandy and Lawrence, so it's a lot about low frequency and so forth. Lots of technical papers about it. Similar effects in soldiers traveling in army lorries, off-road tires. Yeah, the convoy cock. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I was going to say, with regard to sexual arousal, young boys on the back of school buses.
Yeah,
the diesel engine. It's a well-known phenomenon.
Yeah, a lot of us were schoolboys, and we'll move on from that.
Ladies aren't immune, hence the spin drive.
No.
Put it on fast spin and make love to me, you bastard.
This is another presentation altogether. I don't
think I don't think ASSAP would do funding for that.
I can ask. Wasn't it Johnny and Kid and the Pirates playing when the music audience got the shivers down the backbone? Rob Gandy, well done, mate. Nice one. Rob Gandy is the susceptibility the same for the two sexes, whereas you just said, yes, it is. It's vibration. Good one from Ruth. Do people become more sensitive to infrasound if tired or sleep deprived? That could well have some bearing on nighttime investigations, etc.
Interestingly, not been tested.
There you go. Nice one. Okay. I used to hear the Bristol hum regularly as a teenager. I used to hear it quite regularly because I was semi-nocturnal when I was in my late teens. And very, very small hours of the morning, I would hear it. My dad could hear it. My mother couldn't. The blokes could hear it. Me and my dad could hear it.
Out here in West Wales, about 10 years ago, there was a hum reported, which for me, infrasound hum, right on my doorstep. It was manna from heaven, and being, luckily having the equipment, it took a while, but we were actually able to trace the cause of this particular one.
Okay.
Just after they had opened the natural gas terminal at Milford Haven, they'd put in a 36-inch diameter pipeline which ran all the way to the terminal somewhere on the banks of the Severn near Bristol. This massive pipeline, and they were pumping gas through it, continuously. And the pipe itself had become a huge infrasound generator.
Okay.
And what they did was change the pressure of the flow in the gas, which cured the hum.
So the Bristol one was very sporadic. You'd only hear it occasionally. And it did sound like an idling diesel generator, but a long way away. But you could kind of half feel it, half hear it, sort of thing. But I also added, talking about the mosquito, when teenagers learned that they could basically use it to their advantage, and I taught teenagers, and they adopted it as a ringtone. So you can hear them texting each other. It was great. I couldn't, but my colleague could. She could hear it, So yeah, there is something about age. Also, I think men and women have slightly different hearing ranges as well, don't they?
Well, women are slightly higher. Actually, the woman's hearing range is pitched at almost exactly on top of the cry of a human baby.
Well, would be. Yeah.
Which
I can't hear high pitches at all. If I hear Mariah Carey singing, I can't hear when she hits top notes. So all I can see is it's like Norman Collier. I can see her singing away, and then suddenly just like, and then the singing kicks back in again. It's like,
I'd consider that a blessing.
It is. Oh, yeah, I consider myself very lucky with that. So, Christian, Havana syndrome. Michael Beck from the NSA reported extreme fatigue, weakness, struggle to move, mental issues, early onset Parkinson's. The Havana syndrome has been quite a thing, hasn't it? That's kind of resurfaced recently, hasn't it? There's a big thing about it in the FT. It was supposed to be directional ultrasound, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was also a report from within when they were trying to shift Noriega and the Strange Ways prison, they were blasting them with rock music. If there were some very high quality recordings that were available of the sound that the military were using, it was at times heavily laced with ultrasound and infrasound.
Okay.
The audible sound was masking what they were, the full range of frequencies. And of course, most video representations use the MP3 format, which cut off the top and bottom frequencies.
Yeah, it truncates it to such a degree, doesn't it? Yeah, absolutely.
But on full spectrum recordings, old analog recordings especially, you can, from Strange Ways, hear them apply a lot of ultrasound to the signal.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's all there. Nice one. Yeah. Well, one thing I was going to bring up, because this is something that's happening in cryptozoology at the moment, there's an awful lot of mention of infrasound and certain animals, potentially certain cryptids, using infrasound in order to stop people, especially Bigfoot. But there's a thing because there is a precedence for it within mammalia, because tigers do it, don't they? Tigers have two-tone roar. They have a subsonic one which stuns people, and then the loud one.
I took part in a documentary called Tigers Attack for Discovery Channel. It was a 2-hour program. One aspect of it specifically looked at the paralyzing roar of the tiger, because there is an infrasonic component. Another looked at infrasound used by elephants for communication over extreme distances. And it was properly measured, and it was there. Tigers kind of, it's not physically stunned, but they disorientate their prey animal by roaring at it and going,
yes, because there was a guy on it, because I remember it was a documentary with Attenborough a while back. That's where I first heard about it. And it was a guy who was a bearer who basically, he was a warden, I think, one in the forest. He said, and he was stalked by a tiger, and he said he felt it. He heard the roar. 10 seconds after he felt it, he said it was just like a whomp in his chest. He said he could, what the hell was that? And then roar,
It's also believed that the sperm whale does it as well, and that the cavity on the sperm whale's head is designed to focus sound waves ahead of the whale, not for sonar, although sonar is a part of that, but it uses it as a stun and acoustic weapon. I think it's the squid or its other prey.
Nice one. Brilliant. I'll have a chat with you then about tiger roars, because there's something I'm working on for that. we're working on. Brilliant. Yes, that'd be lovely. Thank you very much. Right then, and finally, two last ones. Tony, a couple of last ones. Tony, audiologists only normally test up to 8 kilohertz. So the understanding of the normal distribution of human hearing above that is somewhat limited, with high frequency deafness being more common than generally realised. Maybe congenital or acquired rather than age related.
Well, I mean, I what I used in the standard charts, which take no account of hearing and individual, sort of environmental hearing loss. We listen to rock music too loud a volume. We got earphones in with the volume turned up. That will damp permanently to affect the way in which sound or the sound levels are perceived.
Oh, totally true. I mean, I worked in nightclubs when I was like in my early 20s. Luckily, I was on the door, so I was outside. But my colleagues were on the floor. Nearly all of them are completely deaf now. They've got very, very limited hearing range. They use earplugs these days, but 25 years ago they didn't.
I have hearing loss in one ear caused by my as people of my generation did. We were all in a band. I played the bass and was always next to the bass amp, which was always turned up loud, and blasted out one ear.
I know, good God. Well, I'm pretty deaf as it is, but I mean, God knows what they feel. I must admit, yeah. Nicola, last year at Bath, I couldn't sleep due to the hum. Next morning, someone close to me also heard it. Thank goodness it wasn't just me. It's that side of Bath. So I'll come from that side of Bristol, and it's more pervasive here than it is on the western side. Despite the western side being the one with all the industrial stuff, like the pipelines and so forth, you'd think it'd be closer to, wouldn't you? But there you go. Okay. Great talk as always. Thanks, Steve, and an awful lot of thanks to you.
My pleasure. And hopefully
Thank you all.
Given
Sorry, go on.
Some rest to the mythology of the Uncanny Team Skeptics.
Fabulous. I need to go. So, I mean, thank you so much, Steve. I really, really enjoyed it, mate. But Claire can take back over. Thank you so much. And we'll talk later about tigers.
Thank you.
Yeah, guys.
We will talk about buses and tumble dryers later, Stu. You're on a warning.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Steve, thank you ever so much. Brilliant talk.